There are certain objects people keep in their homes without ever truly thinking about them. A chair by the window, an old clock on the wall, a mirror hanging quietly where it has always been. Most of the time, these things are simply part of the background of everyday life. They reflect, they tick, they sit in silence. But sometimes, something watches back. In a quiet neighborhood on the edge of a growing city, there stood a modest house that had passed through several owners over the years. It was not particularly old, nor did it carry any obvious signs of history. To anyone passing by, it looked like any other home, clean, simple, and forgettable. That is, until someone noticed the mirror. It hung in the hallway, just outside the main living room, framed in dark wood that seemed slightly out of place compared to the rest of the house's decor. No one could say exactly when it had been placed there. It had simply always been part of the house, present through every change, every new resident, every quiet passing year. Most people didn't pay much attention to it at first. After all, it was just a mirror. It reflected what stood before it and nothing more. But over time, small things began to feel off. It started with reflections that seemed slightly delayed, as though the image in the mirror was just a fraction of a second behind reality. Not enough to be immediately alarming, but enough to make someone pause, to blink, to look again, just to be sure. Then came the moments when the reflection didn't quite match what was in front of it. A hand raised a little slower, a head turned a little later, subtle differences that were easy to dismiss until they weren't. The first person to truly question the mirror was a young man named Adrian Cole, who had recently moved into the house after relocating for work. Adrian was not superstitious, nor was he easily unsettled. He believed in logic and clear explanations, in the idea that every strange occurrence could eventually be understood. But the mirror tested that belief. It began one evening as he passed through the hallway on his way to the kitchen. Out of habit, he glanced at his reflection. For a moment, everything looked normal. But as he continued walking, something made him stop. He turned back toward the mirror, and this time he noticed it. His reflection was still facing forward. Adrian stood frozen, staring at the glass as his reflection slowly, almost reluctantly, turned to face him. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable. It was delayed, not by much, but enough to feel wrong. He stepped closer. The reflection mirrored him perfectly now, as though nothing unusual had happened. Adrian frowned, convincing himself it must have been a trick of perception, a momentary lapse caused by fatigue. He had been working long hours. His mind was likely playing tricks on him. But over the next few days, the same thing happened again and again. Each time, the delay became more noticeable. Each time, the reflection seemed less like a perfect copy and more like something trying to imitate him. It wasn't long before Adrian began avoiding the mirror altogether. He would pass through the hallway quickly, keeping his eyes forward, refusing to look at the glass. For a while, that seemed to help. If he didn't look at it, he didn't have to think about it. But the mirror didn't stop. One night, as he sat alone in the living room, he heard something faint behind him, a soft sound like a whisper, or the faint scrape of movement. He turned toward the hallway instinctively, and there it was, the mirror. But something was different. Even from a distance, he could see that his reflection was not matching his position. He was sitting on the couch, but in the mirror, he was standing in the hallway, facing forward, watching. Adrian stood up slowly, his heart beginning to race. As he stepped closer, the reflection didn't move. It remained exactly where it was, standing still, its gaze fixed directly ahead. And then, very slowly, it smiled. Adrian stopped, because he wasn't smiling. The expression on the reflection's face was subtle, almost calm, but it didn't belong to him. It felt deliberate, aware. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if nothing had happened, the reflection shifted, matching his position once again, standing where he stood, looking exactly as he did. The smile was gone. Adrian didn't sleep that night. From that point on, the house no longer felt like a place of comfort. It felt watched, not in an obvious or overwhelming way, but in a quiet, persistent manner that never fully faded. The mirror became the center of that feeling. Days passed, and Adrian began to notice a pattern. The longer he avoided the mirror, the more unusual its behavior became. When he finally looked at it again, the delay grew longer. The movements became less synchronized. And sometimes the reflection would do something completely unexpected, something Adrian himself had not done. One evening, he decided to test it. Standing in front of the mirror, he remained perfectly still. He watched his reflection closely, waiting for something to happen. For a few seconds, everything appeared normal. Then, slowly, the reflection blinked. Adrian hadn't blinked. He stepped back instinctively, his pulse quickening. The reflection followed a moment later, mimicking his movement with that same unnatural delay. And then it spoke, not aloud, not in a way that echoed through the room, but in a way that felt directly inside his mind. "You've been here longer than the others." Adrian's breath caught. He stared at the mirror, unsure if he had imagined it, but the reflection tilted its head slightly, as though acknowledging his reaction. "Most don't stay this long. They leave when they notice, or they stop looking." Adrian found himself unable to move, unable to look away. "But you stayed, you kept watching." The reflection's expression softened, becoming almost curious. "That means you remember." Adrian shook his head slightly, trying to break the moment, trying to convince himself this wasn't real. But the mirror did not release him. The mirror doesn't just reflect, it remembers. Images began to flicker faintly within the glass. Not clear, not fully formed, but enough to suggest something deeper. Shapes, faces, moments that did not belong to the present. "Everyone who has stood here leaves something behind," the voice said. "A memory, a trace, a version of themselves." Adrian felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "And now, you have too." The reflection stepped forward, but Adrian had not moved. For a brief, impossible moment, the distance between them felt thinner, as though the mirror was no longer just a surface, but something else entirely. Adrian stumbled back, breaking the connection. The reflection snapped back into place, matching him perfectly once more. Silent, still, as though nothing had happened. The next morning, Adrian left the house. He packed only what he needed and didn't look back. He didn't try to explain what had happened, didn't try to understand it. Some things, he realized, were better left unanswered. The house was sold not long after, and the mirror remained. It still hangs in the hallway, just as it always has. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and no one thinks to question it, the reflection doesn't quite match. Not immediately, not perfectly, because the mirror is not just showing what is there, it is remembering what was. And somewhere within it, every reflection that has ever stood before it is still looking back.
It's Mythic Murmurs.